Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, and in this particular video I want to talk about a certain number of things that I feel Creative Assembly needs to do going forward with the game in order to make for a substantially better experience with the game. Now, to be clear, I do make a bunch of posts critical of Total War, and I do think that we are certainly at the stage where Creative Assembly can either do well with the game, or they can do very, very poorly with the game and end up with a disaster on their hands. Even bigger than the one that they've currently gotten with respect to Shadows of Change. And really, it wasn't just a question of Shadows of Change, it was a combination of events culminating in that apology statement that they released. I want to be clear, it is nice for Creative Assembly to issue an apology. I think that is certainly a good move on their part. But at the same time, it will be actions and not words that will determine how much of that is actually true and how much of that is just plain old manipulation on their part. Now, there's a lot of things, of course, to be said on this subject, but I personally believe, with respect to Creative Assembly, that they're not necessarily so willing to change their ways as much as they are forced to change their ways. I might make an entire video on this particular subject, but suffice to say, from my perspective, I do believe that Creative Assembly has ended up in a position where they were trying to branch out, basically, from Total War. They were trying to do two things at the same time. One, they were trying to make as much profit as possible from Total War, and at the same time, with Hyenas in particular, they were trying to branch out into other genres. They devoted significant resources. $100 million for a company like Creative Assembly is not insignificant. They lost that money. Now, it is pretty extreme that I think it's one of the biggest losses in video gaming history. Because in general, when you look at video games being failing, to some extent, like it happens post-launch, right? Think of something like Mass Effect Andromeda. I mean, you can imagine that game obviously did very poorly. They canceled DLC, etc. But at the same time, despite that situation, despite everything that ended up happening with Mass Effect Andromeda, that game still sold a good amount of copies, and you can imagine that Electronic Arts and BioWare did make some profit on that particular subject. It's not like they got away with nothing. On Hyenas, they lost like absolutely everything. They lost everything they were working on. They put in all that money, all that effort, and it just didn't end up working all that well. So, here's one of the first things I would say that Creative Assembly needs to change about the company. Actually have their developers playing Total War consistently. If people are working on something like Warhammer 3, and people in general in the company should be playing Total War. Not older Total Wars, though there might be some lessons, some valuable lessons they can learn by playing those games and things that they shouldn't repeat in the series because they've made some of the mistakes over and over again. But they should have the current developers across the entire company, not just a couple of people, not just the testers, but everyone from artists who might understand that throwing a bunch of detail in the Immortal Empires map sounds great until you realize how much it devastates the performance of Immortal Empires. One of the things I was pretty shocked to discover, though I was not necessarily, I guess you could say, surprised, but one of the things that was shocking to some extent was the fact that someone I know that worked in Creative Assembly, and I know for certain he worked in Creative Assembly, I asked them, it's like, well, do people in the company play the game? Like, how much do they play the game? And it's like very few people in Creative Assembly actually play Total War. That is something I do feel needs to change, because there's so many times, so many issues that happen again and again and again with these games. Such poor handling of difficulty balancing, such poor decision making, such overlooked issues that would be obvious to anyone that was playing this game, for instance, Warhammer 3, consistently. Now, I was also told very clearly that in general with a lot of the issues, that the developers are actually aware of them. Like, people were aware of, like, Realms of Chaos gonna be that there was gonna be a hot pile of garbage even before it came out. So it's not like the developers are completely blind to what is happening, but there are clearly things that they are overlooking. Autoresolve, difficulty handling. I mean, this is something I suspected for a long time because I was looking at marketing videos, and I was like, looking at those marketing videos and looking at those developers playing those games, and I'm just like thinking to myself, damn, like, I don't want to call anyone bad at the game just because they're in a marketing video, they're showcasing some things in a certain way, especially since in those kind of videos, right? In those kind of videos, you do have, let's just say, a particular interest in showcasing things as opposed to necessarily playing in the best possible way. But I do have to mention this. It seemed very, very clear to me that a lot of the people that were in the company, at least marketing the video, like, the people making a game should know how that game is played. And this is clearly something that isn't the case in Total War. The fact that you have so many mods that fix so many issues very quickly, very easily. The fact that you have issues that go on for a very, very long period of time without being addressed and only get addressed when someone in the community points out does indicate to me that there's a lot of things that Creative Assembly overlooks. For all the issues they acknowledge, even if they never fix them, because that's one of the things I was told. Like, they know a lot of the issues, they aren't fixing them because they don't get the budget, they don't get the funds, they don't get permission to do so. So you do have that particular issue, but consider this. When Shadows of Change was being released, we got a version pre-launch for us content creators, right? We got early access to it. And it had a very glaring bug with Cafe and Caravans. Now, I didn't discover this. I believe someone else discovered it. I first noticed it when Battlesby pointed out, like the YouTuber, streamer, Battlesby, he pointed out the caravans were being broken. So I really dived in deep to figure out exactly what was going on there. And what I discovered is, well, one of the compass options was completely broken, and if you're using the Warpstone Desert, your caravans would just end up being completely and utterly broken in the game. That's what happened there. And it was pointed out by myself, by other people, and it got fixed relatively quickly. And it is good that it got fixed. But the fact that we end up in this kind of situation again and again and again, and now, by the way, it was a good example, but we end up in this situation again and again and again where you have these glaring, obvious problems with the game that never get fixed, that never get resolved, that never get improved on, that we have like range combat issues going on in Warhammer 3 for so long. Like there was a particular patch that made range combat, like the way range combat has worked in Warhammer 3, the way animations in general have worked in Warhammer 3 has been a complete and utter disaster on multiple levels. So we have issue after issue after issue in this game, and we rarely, if ever, have any kind of, if you could call it, solution to these problems. And part of it, I do genuinely believe, part of the problem is the fact that the developers are not playing their own game. They might be aware of issues that are fairly obvious. Like, if you're working on something or developing on something, you're going to generally know what the issue is, even if you don't watch it. Like, I'll tell you, for example, I don't watch a lot of my own videos before I upload them. Does that mean I'm blind to the issues that that are in them? No. Most of the time, I am well aware. Sometimes I do miss certain things, audio issues, about all that. You can miss things. And I imagine something like this does happen for Creative Assembly as well. Like, they do pick up a lot of the stuff, but they may also miss out on some critical stuff as well. And that is one of the problems that we do see with that we do have with Total War. And that's just really the first issue. There's tons of other problems as well on top of it. Racial design, racial balancing, let's talk about another issue. Racial fixes. Why is it that we get patch after patch, and this is really the point where I get genuinely frustrated with Creative Assembly, but why is it that time and again, we get patch after patch after patch from Creative Assembly where they introduce some multiplayer change, some multiplayer cost change, but they never, ever introduce any kind of like, oh, hey, let's buff the economy of Nurgle, for instance, by like 50%. Let's just try that, right? Why is it that it takes a major racial rework to get something like that? Or even then, with the DLC patch like Shadows of Change, we didn't get any change to Kislev's economy. We got 0 changes to Tsinch's economy. We got some changes to Cafe, but very minor stuff. And we're talking here like what, a year and a half, 2 years to get those kind of things? Like, why is it that Creative Assembly, like, is anyone gonna cry like if Nurgle, for instance, gets like a 50% economic benefit? Is that really going to break the game if that happens? You know, one of the worst Legendary Lords, one of the worst races in the game, if Creative Assembly does that. No, they don't care. Like, they don't care. And that's one of the things that I consider essential. Like, tweaking these things. Things that, by the way, modders have done time and again, very easily, very quickly, very simply. There's been a lot of discussion in a lot of those leaked videos from Bellular and Voland and others about like things like technical debt. Yeah, I can understand why technical debt would be a very, let's just say, hot topic of discussion. I get that. At the same time, I can't help but wonder, like, is technical debt just used as an excuse over the fact that the developer just doesn't give a shit to fix a lot of these problems? Because it really seems to me like Creative Assembly is unwilling and incapable on a lot of ways to introduce any kind of racial, any kind of like significant racial changes in the game, unless it's with some DLC patch. And maybe that's deliberate. Maybe that is the deliberate plan. Like one of the excuses that we got from CAA, I believe that one of the official statements on this subject was like, well, we don't do it because you see, it would make modding difficult. And modders turn around and say that's bullshit. By the way, that's exactly like I believe the creator of SFO stated outright. Like, if that's the excuse, it's a load of bullshit. And it doesn't hold true to reality in any way, shape, or form. It is completely divorced from the reality that we actually have when playing playing the game, when it comes to modding the game. I think, if anything, Old World as a mod has indicated very, very clearly how much of that is utter rubbish. Okay, so that's the second point, so point number 4 of this list. Point number 3, Autoresolve. Let's talk about this. The campaign you're seeing right here that I'm playing in real time, I might add, is a campaign that I'm playing on Legendary very hard. Couldn't care less. I am using Autoresolve mods. I'm using Autoresolve mods that are removing the Autoresolve benefits that every freaking settlement has. And look at this campaign map. Like, oh, I don't have to wait for Khazrak to wipe out Midland. I don't see the Black Orcs doing nothing. This actually is a better campaign just because the Autoresolve benefit on settlements is removed. Now, of course, I wiped out Khazrak when he tried to attack Altdorf. It may not necessarily create the best AI dynamic, but at the same time, does that really matter? Like it's not like Khazrak is gonna win against me as the Beastman. It's not like these greenskins are gonna win against me. But it's obviously not a great situation where I can just keep every single battle in a campaign. But the vast majority of the battles are not particularly interesting either. That's kind of the problem. So we do need a better situation with Autoresolve that doesn't just basically boil down to, well, we'll exploit it, right? There are mods that remove every settlement, minor settlement, major settlement, but especially the major settlements. If you wonder why the AI is unwilling to attack capitals, it's because there's a significant Autoresolve benefit to every single capital in the entire game. That's not the joke, by the way. It is a fact that exists in the game right now, that you have this significant Autoresolve benefit to these settlements. And on top of that, you have, beyond the settlement Autoresolve situation, you have such a broken Autoresolve situation that heavily armored units are always going to be favored over lightly armored units. Things like halberdiers, which by the way are the mainstay units of that freaking empire in the lore, are useless to use because they're always going to take significantly more damage in any Autoresolve situation. So you're either fighting a campaign where you're fighting the vast majority of the battles manually, or you just end up using limited army comps because it's going to achieve significantly higher success. Keep in mind that the way your army does in Autoresolve also affects the AI decision making. So if the AI thinks so you can really cheese, and this is the key to it, you can really cheese the AI in a lot of ways, and that's what you do. Like, I played an entire campaign at Malekith, I put those 3 hours there. Let me tell you this, and that was vanilla. Like, that was no mod whatsoever, except like just disabling the constant auto-saving on Legendary, so I wouldn't have performance impacts. Like, no auto-resolve quest balance, no auto-resolve benefit, nothing. No community bug fix, absolutely nothing. Outside of a couple of battles in the early game, I ended up auto-resolving every single battle, the vast majority of the battles in that campaign, with the exception of the quest battles. The reason I was able to do so is like, yeah, you can bullshit your way through the auto-resolve system. So the way the current system works is not good. Armor is too heavily favored. Settlements are too well defended. Now, some people will make the ridiculous argument that, well, settlements of course should have an auto-resolve benefit, right? Because settlements in theory should be hard to take. Yeah, in theory that's a nice fantasy. It doesn't work in practice at all. And I don't care how like people think sieges should work. I'm gonna tell you how sieges do work. So I'm not interested in like the fantasy scenario of like what people have in their heads about how sieges should function. I'm telling you that siege battles are a joke, with the exception of Wood Elf settlements, which funnily enough are some of those battles that you actually want to auto-resolve. With the exception of Wood Elves, you pretty much want to fight every single settlement battle manually. That isn't an exaggeration, by the way. That is how the game is played right now. And as for Wood Elves, well, Wood Elves are actually the exact opposite. If you fight the Sisters of Twilight, or God forbid, Dryka, you never want to engage in a manual battle against Dryka or the Sisters of Twilight, because they will win against you. Like, they will defeat you. That isn't even really a question. They will defeat you if you're not careful about how you end up handling things from a campaign perspective. So, or from a battle perspective, if you don't play if you're not careful, if you're not, if you try and I guess the best way to describe it actually is this. The battles you should be fighting manually are the battles you can avoid with auto-resolve, and the battles that you don't want and the battles that you don't fight manually, or you don't want to fight manually because they're boring pieces of crap like sieges, are precisely the kind of battles that you do end up fighting manually. That's what's broken. And this doesn't, and crucially, and wish to stress this out, this doesn't just affect you as the player. People need to understand this. This affects how the AI behaves versus the other AI factions. This affects empire building in a campaign. You wonder why the AI never builds a massive empire. One of the reasons is actually the auto-resolve system. So that's the third point, which is number 3 on this list. Auto-resolve really needs to take a fucking hike and disappear the way it currently works. It is certainly, I mean, Autoresolve has always been a complicated affair from Creative Assembly's perspective, right? We've had bad Autoresolve systems, we've had good Autoresolve system. I think, like, in general, as much as I would hate to admit it, the current Autoresolve of Warhammer 3 is certainly one of the better ones we've gotten in the series, though I'm always reminded of Shogun 2, right? And how that used to work. And, like, I'm always reminded of, like, the fact that in Shogun 2, when we were talking about the Autoresolve in Shogun 2, if you showed up against the garrison and it had very few units in that, you could Autoresolve it with minimal fucking casualties. Funnily enough as well, when you Autoresolve the Bal in Shogun 2, on the field, the enemy army wouldn't just be completely destroyed. Now, of course, there's reasons, I understand them, why Creative Assembly changed things. I get that. I understand that Creative Assembly was interested in changing some of the dynamics in play in the game, because some of those dynamics were pretty broken. I get them. I comprehend that. I appreciate that. That's not really the problem. Because, like, you would have a lot of enemy armies just running away with no issue whatsoever, and they wanted to make sure that didn't happen. The constant chasing of AI factions wouldn't happen as much. So I get what Creative Assembly did, why they did it. I also understand that some of the things they did in Warhammer 3 were in response to certain decisions in certain things in Warhammer 2, specifically the Order time. I'm pretty sure, like, some of the decisions they made with the Empire, for instance, screwing them over, was deliberately designed because, yeah, the Order tide was a pain in the neck. And, like, it just made playing an evil faction, like the Vampire Counts, for instance, it made them absolutely painful. To be fair, I think with the corruption change, the Vampire Counts have become very viable as a race. Like, I could take the entire Order tide as Vlad and Isabella. That's not the problem, I feel, in a campaign. So, my perspective on the matter is there were already reasons why this wasn't necessary. I also think, genuinely, that one of the reasons that we get this crappy Autoresolve is because Creative Assembly wanted us to fight their glorious minor settlement battles that they put so much effort in reworking the sieges. Like, understand, Creative Assembly did not want us, understand, Creative Assembly did not, what, Vlad, what, Carl, hello? Okay, that's a weird one. I've seen a lot of weird shit in this game, but, let's just say that's one of the weirder ones. Just Carl France disappearing over there, okay. Yeah, that was a bit surprising as a turn of events. Suffice to say. Okay. Right. So let's just win this. Actually, let me just go for that. Okay. So those are some of the points. Developers actually understand the game they're working on as opposed to whatever they're doing right now. Fixes coming in faster. Autoresolve improvements. And then what I would like to talk about is what I would call as growth, casualty replenishment, income. So, growth, casualty replenishment, income, I think that when we're talking about growth, casualty replenishment, income, every faction should be on a pretty good level. Some factions should obviously generate more and all that, but I don't think it's a good way of designing a game in any way, shape, or form to have a system in place where some factions just really have a horrible income and some people are like defending that and saying, oh, it's perfectly fine. No, it's not. It doesn't create a good campaign dynamic. Quite the opposite. It creates a horrible campaign dynamic in many ways in a campaign. I mean, look at this Carl France campaign and understand, like, this campaign is so fucking painful by default that it's like, damn, this actually feels good for once. Holy shit, playing a Carl France campaign and it not feeling complete, and utter freaking misery. That is a shocking experience, yes, I know. So, one of the problems we keep getting is that we have factions that just don't have a good income. And you end up being hamstrung throughout the entire course of your campaign simply because of that. It's not about winning. Like, you can win a campaign as the fucking Demon Prince, who's the worst legendary lord in the game. It doesn't matter. Like, if you know how to play Total War, yeah, you can win a campaign as everything. That's irrelevant from my point of view. Like, being able to win the campaign, there's no prize for that. Like, oh, great, you are winning a campaign in a game that's been out for over a year, where people have figured out a lot of the ways to play and have figured out a lot of the things that you can use and abuse and take advantage of. There's no prizes for that. Let me just put it simply.
No. Yet. What? Sigma's will.
But just because you can doesn't mean it's a good experience. So I'll just give an example. Nakari. Nakari is an awful campaign to actually play. The reason Nakari is so awful is because you end up in the situation where you have very low casualty replenishment, you have very limited recruitment slots, your economy can be decent, especially once you get a lot of vassals, but you end up just like massing Forsaken early on in the game and playing with those and the handful of other units that you start with. And then making cults. Like, Nakari is kind of like an ultimate example of a campaign where you have a lot of power, undeniably so, but it's so fucking awful to play it that you play it once, you enjoy, like, what it is to bash your head against a brick wall that is Tyrion, Alarion, and Alfarian, no problem. And then, once you're done with that, you never bother with it again, because, like, the replay value is vanished. That is where I stand on that particular aspect. And I don't think that's how it should be. I think like we could have a better situation in a campaign. We could have a better dynamic than the one we currently deal with for the most part. That is where I stand on that. Like, we can have better campaigns. There's no reason whatsoever why we have to endure this trash again and again and again. With bad casual, like, it would add replayability. And some people will argue, strongly argue, that, oh, you just want every campaign to be the same. I'm not sure how a campaign as Grimgore, who was a very powerful legendary lord with a good amount of growth, casualty replenishment, and income, is on any way the same level as, say, a campaign as Morathi. It's like, maybe I'm just living in Trala land, but I don't see it. That's not how it is. Just because you have a good baseline does not mean every campaign is the same. Far from it. Very much the opposite in point of fact. It just means that those campaigns that currently do have issues can have a greater amount of replayability, are more attractive to people in general when we're talking about them in Total War. Like, I would like to play a Nakari campaign that wasn't a complete bloody pain without mods. Hell, you know what? Nakari's campaign is actually so painful that even with mods, it's still pretty freaking awful. So, make of that what you will. Not really a great situation to be dealing with in general, from my perspective.
Greetings.
And something that I feel CA should avoid going forward. Finally, the biggest point, variety. Yes, I'm going to add this. Variety. Variety of unit recruitment, variety of heroes, just campaign variety. Yes, this may sound surprising to some people, but actual variety in a campaign is important. Not in the sense of the way some people have presented that, oh, campaign variety is great if some factions have bad casualty replenishment, some have good. No, that's not variety. That's a load of rubbish from my point of view. But when I say variety, consider a campaign like any of the High Elves, or consider a campaign as the Empire. You have a powerful unit roster as the Empire. You almost never get to see it in a campaign, because why would you? It's just better to get like spearmen with shields and crossbowmen than anything else. There's bothering with cavalry, bothering with variety is actually detrimental to your campaign experience. Some people say, well, you don't need to play the most efficiently. From my point of view, from my point of view, regardless of what self-imposed limitations you can have on yourself as a player, it is generally better if the game is designed in a better way. That is where I stand on that.
Yes.
As opposed to what we can get many times. So for instance, like, if you're playing a high elf campaign, you should have reason to use more than, and the ability as well. Like, this is the thing. It's not just like, oh, you should be forced to. No, it's also a question of the ability. How accessible are units? What's the cost of units? What's the cost of heroes? By the way, don't even ask me why the hell I've trained local mesh. I could care less. The Empire research tree is what a joke. That's all I'm gonna say. It's like it's a freaking joke of a research tree. From my point of view.
Yes.
Mistress of Ice.
It could be better. Like, it could be significantly better in terms of real campaign variety. Like, having the ability of getting heroes more, having the ability of getting different unit types faster. Because right now, you have campaign situations where you have like kind of a dead zone in a lot of campaigns. Not all of them. Skaven have a lot of, like, Skaven are great as a race with a lot of variety because they can bypass the growth system. Castorf's kind of, Greenskins have incredible growth. Bretonia, shocking enough. But still, there are issues. You have a situation where with quite a lot of races, it takes them longer than the relevancy of any particular campaign. It doesn't matter which difficulty you're playing on. In every single campaign in the game, the most relevant bits are between turns 1 to 60 at most, beyond an endgame crisis. And I think I speak for a lot of people when I say the endgame crisis is not particularly fun or interesting. So I do believe, in the most genuine sense, that one of the things Creative Assembly could do is give us the ability of actually having more variety during the course of our campaigns. More freer ability with unit recruitment, the warband upgrade system. Like, just taking the warband upgrade system and using that for more races, those kind of things. I think those would be positive steps. Yeah, don't ask me about Festus just committing suicide here. I think those would be positive steps in general that Creative Assembly could take to make for more interesting campaigns and campaign experience overall. That is where I stand on that. As opposed to what we're seeing constantly at the moment, where you end up with campaigns that are severely limited. One of the things I would also say is that there are certain campaigns where quite a few races could benefit from more resources. One of the things I actually really liked about the Total War Saga Troy was the fact that you actually had a ton of resources to play with during the course of a campaign like that. You had to decide, and I think like one of the major step backwards, yes, the major step backwards that we got with respect to something like one of the major step backwards that we got with something like Pharaoh is the fact that we ended up in this kind of situation where you just didn't really have as many resources available there, which is actually a significant shame as far as I see it, because there was so much potential to do so much in a campaign there. And like Pharaoh was a major step backward from my point of view. That's where I stand on that. Like, I think it could have been better, and it wasn't. And that was a deliberate decision by Creative Assembly that ended up hurting us in a fairly substantial way. And they should have avoided making that decision. I don't know what CA Sophia was doing. I don't know what X, Y, and Z part of the company was doing. But like, variety comes from having resources and ability to spend them. We should also get like some kind of like, if Creative Assembly wants to keep warband upgrade for something like the Warriors of Chaos, fair enough, right? But I think one of the things they could do and should do is give us a system like, hey, you know, we want to play a campaign. Like right now, the best way to play the game is to not play tall. Like if you're playing tall, which is like just being patient, building up a massive empire and all that, you're going to end up losing. Or you're going to end up significantly on back foot. You're going to end up with a more limited economy, with fewer troops, fewer resources. That's just simply a fact. That's not really a debate, as I see it. But it doesn't have to be like that. It could be better. It could be different. It could be a significantly superior experience if we could get heroes easier in certain campaigns. If you're playing an Empire campaign, you could get artillery to the front line, like the ability of breaking down walls, so sieges aren't the misery of like just parking your archers on an independent section of the wall and just using them to kill everything in sight, or abusing or cheesing the game. Like right now, this is the worst part about it. The best way to play the game that achieves the highest results is to cheese the shit out of it. That's not how it should be. And one of the reasons behind that is you just don't have the variety that you would need to adopt different playstyle. Like right here, you could literally argue I'm cheating using these mods, right? Like all I'm doing, by the way, is like just using some Autoresolve mods that remove the Autoresolve benefits that the AI gets, which yes, they do have them. And removing the Autoresolve benefits that settlements have. That's all I'm doing here, right? So I'm getting an Autoresolve modifier for myself as the player, and I'm removing the Autoresolve benefit that the AI does have. That is all. Nothing more. And suddenly it's like... but the thing is, like, these kind of results, with the exception of like maybe 1 or 2 battles here, I could achieve on my own manually. That's not really necessarily the problem. So, like, I do think that we could have a better situation in our campaigns. That's not really a big disputable fact from my point of view. But we don't. And we end up lacking severely in terms of campaign variety because of decisions that CA has made. I mean, part of it, to be certain, is the poor map of Immortal Empires. Like, Old World actually does end up feeling better. Just because Immortal Empires, yeah, it's not a great map. Simple as that. Like, there's no argument as I see it on that subject. But it doesn't necessarily have to be like this. And I think that would be one of the critical elements that I would like to see changed from Creative Assembly.
Men, I will fight with you.
We probably won't, for any number of reasons. But it would be nice if we did get those kind of changes during the course of our campaigns, as opposed to just playing this kind of race to the bottom, if you will, in a campaign where it's like, who can cheese the most? Who can get away with the most amount of cheese during the course of a campaign? That kind of stuff. Which just isn't particularly great, I'm gonna say. It really isn't. Could be better, could be more fun, could be more interesting, could be more compelling than what we currently have.
Approach us, friend, and make your offer.
Empire's blessing.
That's my perspective on things. Quastin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Oh, and by the way, just to cap it off, like, when I say cheese, do you know what the best thing is to do as the Empire? You don't even bother dealing with Festus and all that. Well, why do that? Like, why fight all of this territory that you have to rebuild from scratch anyway? No, you know what the best thing is? You go declare war on Null, and you farm them for Imperial authority, you abuse the crap out of the system. That's the kind of things that need to be stopped. Or winning battles against, winning wars against Legendary Lords just by literally abusing ambush stance or something like that. Using the same army over and over and over again in the same campaign because getting any kind of unit variety to the front is like not worth it from a resource perspective. Those are the kind of things that I would look to change. Stay tuned for more.